Bob Murphy Show, episode 442.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews, conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bob Murphy Show. Another crossover. This time, Adam and I are covering some recent news items involving the Trump administration, and they all have a common theme where Trump is arguably acting outside of his constitutional role. And so as much as Adam and I have pushed back in episodes past against Trump derangement syndrome, here we're having to say that Donald is acting outside the bounds of his proper authority. So we'll give you lots of the analysis, and of course, even if you have heard me talk about some of these issues on other podcasts, I promise you we give new nuggets in this discussion. Here we go, Adam Heyman and me talking about Trump and his extra-constitutional proclivities.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, Adam.
So, folks, we're going to be talking about some of the crazy things that are going on in the Trump presidency lately. But before we dive in, Bob, did you know that it seems like it's just been one madcap thing after another, but it's only been like 7.5 months since he was sworn in. And he sat on that little stage and signed those 200 executive orders and took the pictures, and you and I are looking at this incredible rush of activity and talking about what was good and what was bad, what we were hopeful for, what we were scared of. And it's only 7.5 months later, and it just seems like a whirlwind.
Yeah, and I remember, too, that the first crossover I think that we did, after he won, we had to hurry up and try to get it out because we just knew he's going to do 19 other things, before he's going to abolish 6 agencies by the time this thing drops. So
yeah, we'd start 5 new wars.
I feel like this guy, for those watching.
Folks, annexed Canada.
This is just, we, with the 5-year-old and the 2-year-old went to the store to get some Halloween stuff, and I said that I would show that on the podcast, and I thought that would be hilarious. So
it is hilarious.
Yep.
It is hilarious. Who doesn't love a skull? So, yeah, boy, Trump's done stuff I didn't think he was going to do. Let's start off with the not worrying at all fact that your national government now owns 9.9% of the Intel chip-making company, and they're managing to frame it as a heck of a deal, Bob.
So I was asked to go on the Reason podcast, Just Asking Questions thing, and so I was prepping for that. And let me just quickly go through like the various positions that I held. And I'm thinking, so at first I thought, this is some kind of crony deal, that Trump must know the people behind Intel are like some of the major shareholders or something. This is just kind of a way to funnel money to them because they're, politically connected or something. And that's crony capitalism. And then I learned that, no, Trump had called for the CEO to be fired, because of his alleged ties to China, which may actually be true. I mean, some of that stuff, if even half of that's true, like I can understand why people are concerned about that. But okay. And so then I was like, well, that's kind of weird. And then I also thought, okay, so maybe it was like an infusion of capital and that, it's still bolster. But no, because they bought the shares like ostensibly below the market price. Oh, and then the other wrinkle is it was money that Intel had already been promised. So on the margin, they just came in and said, we think your CEO should resign. The guy flew to Washington, and then in order for them to get money that they already thought they were getting, they give over 9.9% of the company. And that, this is capitalism for the win, baby.
Cue the scene from Star Wars.
Yeah.
Pray I do not alter the deal further.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, it's just goofy. I was looking into the history of this Chips and Science Act lunacy, and apparently that thing had started to get organized during the Trump administration, the first one, in 2019, and then organized, passed by Congress, and then signed and all that in 2022. And, well, I have several thoughts. The first is, I mean, I don't remember people really complaining on a principled basis that we shouldn't just hand all this money over to the semiconductor industry in the United States. Like isn't, that's a big violation of the free market as well, but I didn't hear that many people complaining about it. And then all of a sudden, Trump comes along and says, hey, if you want the rest of this thing, and we own 10% of you now. And 5 seconds after threatening to do something unnamed to the CEO if he doesn't resign immediately. I mean, I was reminded of the Congress hauling the CEOs of all the big social media companies before Congress and threatening to revoke, whatever you call it, Provision 230 that keeps them from being, sued for libel anytime anybody just says some random thing. And then acting all innocent, like we weren't putting any pressure on the social media companies. Well, it's a similar thing here. I mean, Intel is basically a company that's all mobbed up now. The U.S. government has 10%. There's a provision where they could get another 5%. I forget what the detail is. But if you're trying to tell me that these are silent, non-voting shares and the government isn't going to have any influence, I just don't believe you. That sounds childish. And furthermore, talk about ossification of a, cronyism. Who's going to compete with a chip-making company that's mobbed up with the government? How is that going to work? Think the government's just going to let their investment, lose? If somebody starts to supremely outcompete them? No. So this thing bothers me in all manner of ways.
Yeah, and even, like you say, like the clips, like of Lutnick talking about it afterward. I mean, it was not... The way they were trying to justify it was just crazy. Like you say, it was mob stuff. And, I mean, everything else, and we'll dwell on this a bit, folks, but for the MAGA people who think, oh, yeah, this is totally awesome, this is great. I mean, if the whole point of this ostensibly is we want to bring back, chip manufacturing is really important and we can't outsource this and this is crazy to have foreign countries doing this is like vital to national defense, then the last thing in the world you would want to do is pseudo-nationalize a company and send out the signal that, yeah, if your jurisdiction is within the United States, this kind of thing can happen. You can be sitting there minding your own business, and then all of a sudden, if some senator doesn't like your CEO because, he looks funny, then and raises a stink about it, that then the president can just start tweeting out or putting on Truth Social that you should be stepped down and you got to fly to Washington. Next thing you know, whoop, 9.9% of your company's gone without any
just
extra
in case,
money.
I mean, I sort of glossed over it, but let's read Trump's post because it's insane for this to come from the president of your country. The CEO of Intel is highly conflicted, in all caps, conflicted, and must resign immediately. There is no other solution to this problem. Thank you for your attention to this problem. And then again, 5 seconds later, he's muscling in and taking 10%. That ought to freak people out.
Right. I mean, Adams engaging in a slip of hyperbole was like, what, 2 weeks later? When this deal,
5 seconds started.
This completely voluntary, above board capitalism, textbook model of interactive trades and of voluntary transactions. I mean, this is crazy. For example, if some South American tin pot dictator says, well, this is kind of crazy. I mean, our people have been giving up their oil to these international companies, and so I looked at their revenue stream and I'm like, hey, you're getting most of your revenue in our continent from us, and so we should get a piece of that. What could make more sense than that our people should get a piece of that? Forget the the legality or the justice or the fairness of that. Other things equal, is that going to make investors want to locate in that country? Of course not.
Right.
And so again, if the whole point is you want to bring back jobs in manufacturing and all these important defense-related industries to the United States, this kind of stuff is insane.
I want you to do a very straightforward smackdown of that argument that I think was Luckner was making. Like, let's say it's all Joe Biden's fault that all this money just got funneled to Intel through the CHIPS Act. And he's just saying, hey, that's crazy. That's just taxpayer waste, and we're not getting anything for it. So we're just coming in here and making a good deal. This way the taxpayer gets at least a 10% return on blah, blah, blah. A lot of people are just going to do the math and go, well, yeah, it's right. We were getting nothing for all our taxpayer money getting stolen, and now we're getting something, so this is better, right? Do you have any quick rejoinder that...
I mean, there's a few things. So one would be that, okay, yes, so if you're going to try to undo a past mistake where the government gave tax dollars to a company and you want to say, how can we undo that? You can try to claw back the money. I mean, that's the most straightforward way to do it. Not just like, oh, I guess now we just own you, and the other thing too is even on its own terms, again, when you go and look at the details, it implied, I forget what the premium was. I want to say like 14%, but I might just be making that number up. It was even higher. But it wasn't even like they took the market share price and then said, okay, well, given how much we gave to you, therefore we should get this many shares. Like, no, it was, so, you could just exaggerate it. Well, why didn't they get 50%? And then the idea too, so, and this is what some people push back to me when I did the Drake meme about a New York City government owning a grocery store. People are like, no. And then federal government owning Intel, or I said a chip manufacturer, and yes. And people push back, oh no, it's not a controlling, it's not a voting, just only 9.9. You're like as if this has nothing to do, and that that now, oh yeah, the fact that I don't care what do I care what Trump thinks of me or whatever. He only owns 9.9% of the company. I don't care, which is
it's ridiculous.
Among other things, they could threaten to dump the stock. You know what I mean? Like if somebody owns 9.9% of your company, it's a big company. You don't want to get that guy mad at you or have him going around telling people he hates the direction the company's in. Like that's not good for business. So this is trying to have it both ways where it's like Schrodinger's administration. On the one hand, they're doing all this stuff that's going to have this great revitalizing effect on U.S. industry. And on the other hand, they're completely impotent and they're not affecting industry decisions one way or the other. So, well, which one is it, guys? So there's that. But also, too, just to unpack a little bit, the more general idea that, because also Lutnick, it wasn't in the clips that they played on that Reason thing, but I looked elsewhere where he was making comments. And he said something like, yeah, we're also looking at, I think it was Lockheed Martin, where like, I think what I'm saying is the right number, but it was the spirit of this is definitely correct, where he said something like, yeah, I reviewed the files and, over the past blah, blah, 97% of their revenue comes from federal contracts. And so, I'm thinking we should take some ownership stake in them as well and get a return for the American people. And so, okay, so what that means then is you have been vastly overpaying for these projects, right? In other words, if you can just take 10% or whatever the number is of a company, and that's not going to make them all of a sudden say, well, we need more, we need to charge you higher price now for these contracts to make whatever it is that they're making, fighter jets or whatever. Or if they can just eat it, well, then obviously the real issue is you guys have been vastly overpaying. And so you're in a position to say, hey, since we're 97% of your business, we've been looking at these numbers. I'm from the business world, and this is crazy. You're charging us this, and this. Tell you what, for this, this next project that we haven't authorized yet, we're gonna insist on 20% cost reduction, or else you don't get it. All right, that's the way you would do it, not to assume taxpayer ownership of a bloated company that's getting all these sweetheart deals. That doesn't make any. Why does the taxpayer want 10% of a company that has vast cost overruns and stuff? That's stupid.
Because Rube Goldberg contraptions are way more efficient than just paying a lower cost for the product. You'll also hear people saying this is no big deal. I mean, after the 2008 recession or whatever we're calling it, the government owned a piece of GM and Chrysler, and it ended up being just sort of a bailout. Eventually, the government sold those shares and they lost a little bit of money, but it's no big deal. Well, first of all, that was horrible too. But second of all, this is different. Intel wasn't dying. This wasn't an economic collapse. This is being done under the auspices of national security or economic security or something. And, in order to compete with China or whatever. And it just makes me think that you can use that national security argument for all sorts of industries, that you would need in wartime or to protect supply chains or whatever. And then that means, if you're going to do it this way, government ownership of the means of production, or at least a piece of it, with ostensible private control. That's technically fascism, the economic model. And you could easily see it slipping towards something a whole lot more like communism. And it just puts me in mind of, like a lot of the old right people would say, obviously we want to have a republic with a small government and a free market, but we're fighting the Soviet Union, so we have to have this massive government military buildup. But if that wasn't the case, we could just go back to being the shining city on the hill. So in order to defeat our enemy, we become just like them and poison ourselves. Or we're doing the same thing now. If our enemy is China, I have no idea why they have to be our enemy. But if that's the case, do we really have to have, communist infiltration, government ownership of these companies in order to defeat this implacable enemy? I don't know. I just don't get it, Bob.
Well, right. So I agree with everything you're saying, and yeah, it's, again, the irony is this is coming from ostensible pro-business, conservative, free market leaning. Yeah, and I understand, for example, like an Orrin McIntyre or a Matt Walsh doesn't want to legalize heroin. I get it, right? Okay, I disagree with them, but I understand that, and that makes sense that they would have that position. But I'm saying something like this. I mean, if you think this is going to promote U.S. industry, and that, oh yes, because it's really important for us to have innovative semiconductor chips at affordable prices, and we want to encourage entrepreneurship and the way to do that is to have the federal government take a 10% share in your company. I mean, that's okay. So capitalism isn't the right system then. Like you don't believe in that, and that's fine. But just admit that yes, the Chinese communists are right, and that is the way to proceed. And so okay. So again, you know what I mean? Like, I can understand somebody saying, "Oh, well, if Napoleon's drafting his men, then the other powers have to resort to the draft." Because again, I disagree with that, and I took that argument on specifically in chaos theory to say that no, free labor is better, and you can defend your country better with free labor than not. But in a case like that, yeah, I get it. But again, if it's like, oh, well, how can our industries possibly compete when the other ones are teamed up with the Chinese government? That's, again, like you should say, oh, phew, thank goodness the Chinese government is hobbling their competitors, by trying to micromanage stuff, because we know socialism doesn't work, and at least they're making their industry, less productive. So that's kind of my overall take on that stuff. And again, it's the analogy I use in the reason thing. I don't know if for some people this might help or not, but it's two separate things to say, hey, I am a customer of a certain business and it is good for me to invest in that business, right? If you just happen to go to Starbucks a lot, it doesn't follow that therefore you should adjust your portfolio.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like your business, it is what it is, right? And so on the margin, whether you should invest in them or not really isn't strictly speaking tied to whether you consume a lot of their coffee or not. So anyway.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's another rhetorical element that I think it's worth pointing out. The kinds of people who are cheering what Trump just did and saying, just look at it, this makes sense. We were out all this money and now we have 10% of Intel. That's obviously better than before. These are the people who will reflexively just say, we need to get a good manager in there as president to run the government like a business. And if you're thinking in that framework, well, I guess this makes sense. We did have just an outflow and now we got this asset or, 10% of some productive thing, which is why you should just push back. The government is not a business. This is not investment. That's not what that is. Private people with private savings can invest. This is something else because, it's like the difference between bunny rabbits and tigers. A business is not a government. These are different things.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. I think you're right. I understand why Lutnick and those guys now are speaking like at first I was shocked because I thought they knew more. Now I realize that no, it's just, they are, good at what, when they're quote in their lane, and I realize how condescending and elitist I sound or whatever, but Sorry, what they're saying is goofy. And
have they never been, Bob?
yeah, so I mean, I don't know if this analogy helps, but it'd be like, yeah, I mean, once we realize that the Federal Reserve can just create money, I mean, the president got on the phone and, they printed up $50 trillion. Now that's for the American taxpayer. Like, isn't it better to have $50 trillion than not? Like in private business, if I just came up with $50 trillion, then that would be good, right? So
basic accounting, yeah.
So but when you realize, well, no, see, because in private business, if you're constrained by contracts and stuff like that, and you can't just print up $50 trillion. So.
All right, let's move on to this little beef Trump has with the Federal Reserve, and by proxy, I guess this woman, Lisa Cook, who has only been a member of the Board of Governors since 2022. Mm-hmm. She was not confirmed by the Senate exactly. She was confirmed by Kamala Harris because it was the Senate was deadlocked. She had to cast the deciding vote to get her confirmed. But in this flurry of Trump being furious with Powell for not lowering interest rates to help his economy or whatever, ignoring the inflation problem we just suffered through, he's decided to follow up. Actually, I mean, somebody in a completely different apartment, housing and urban development or something, said that this Lisa Cook woman had committed some minor mortgage fraud. Like she had both her first and her second houses declared on the mortgage application as the primary residence to get a lower rate. And then it came out that there's a third house she owns, and she called that her secondary residence. And so these things have been referred to the DOJ for prosecution. I assume it's the DOJ. And Trump, since this came out, just said, well, I'm firing you for cause. And now you have this hilarious George Costanza thing where she's just like acting like that. No, you didn't fire me. I'm showing up to work and everything's fine. And it's hilarious, and it's also horrifying. We live in a...
When you said it to George Costanza, I thought you were going to say, was that wrong? Was I not supposed to do that? If I had any idea.
Yeah, that is pretty bad. I mean, she's this financial, wizard, professor of economics, and in charge of whatever she's supposed to be in charge of, and she does that. So on the one hand, it's like sort of minor, but on the other hand, how dare you? What are you doing? So, I mean, there's a lot there for you to dig your teeth into. What do you think about this whole affair?
So on the one hand, there's some irony here. I'm just looking up again. If you remember, folks, it was Trump originally was convicted. The New York Attorney General Letitia James brought a civil fraud case against him.
Oh yeah,
for $500 million because saying he overstated the value of, I think it was his Mar-a-Lago properties and stuff like that when he was just trying to get a loan. I think it was from Deutsche Bank. Does that sound right to you? I believe it was.
Yeah.
And that was ridiculous because he paid back the loan and everything. Deutsche Bank came and testified and said, yeah, we're cool with this. This is standard.
Deutsche Bank didn't for 1 second think that number had anything to do with anything.
Right. They said
they appraised it themselves.
Yeah, right. And so there is that, so I mean, I'm not saying they're literally the same thing, but they're certainly kissing cousins. So it is just kind of funny that the MAGA people defending Trump on that were like, oh, give me this is standard. And then over there's like, a Fed regulator said on her thing that 2 of her homes were primary residences. Oh my God, hang on. I gotta sit down for a minute, catch my breath. This is incredible. I can't believe this. So, there is that element to it. So just to give people a little bit of the backstory to understand why this is such a big deal. So the Board of Governors is 7 members. There's actually, right now, there's only 6. One of them just resigned in early August. I've been looking around to see, was there some reason? Because she had only been appointed since 2023. And so I think she teaches at Georgetown or something, and she was going back there. That's why she resigned. Like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go back to teaching.
The one who you say is missing, is that a Biden appointee or a Trump appointee?
Yeah, from 2023. Yeah, so that's what people are saying. Trump is trying to stack the Board of Governors. This is what they're talking about. Because the so it's 7 members Board of Governors. What is it, the 12 members of the Federal Open Market Committee. So that's the thing that meets to set interest rate policy, well, monetary policy in general. But, when the Fed met today and decided to hold interest rates steady, blah, blah, blah. And so the Board of Governors is on that. And then there's a rotating thing with the other Fed presidents. in terms of like who gets to vote at these meetings. So the board of governors is pretty powerful. There's a 7-member, and they're appointed for 14-year, single appointment terms. The reason this is all fresh, folks, because I was doing research. I'm writing up something on this. And so, for example, just see how it works. So Powell was originally appointed when Frederick Mishkin stepped down early, I think, or maybe his position was just ending. Yeah, no, he stepped down early because there was 2 years left. So Powell originally comes, so you're allowed to finish somebody else's term before it expires, and then you can get reappointed. And so that's what happened with Powell. So the deal is, to be like the Fed chair, you got to first be on the board of governors. And so being on the board of governors is a 14-year deal, and boom, once that 14 years is up, you're done. You can't get renewed. But you can be Fed chair for 4-year terms during that tenure if you want. You got to keep getting nominated and confirmed and everything if that's what happens. So what's interesting is it was, and I was doing the research. How Trump just is always shooting his mouth off and has feuds with people and say one thing and someone quotes him and then he'll walk it back somewhere else and he'll get quoted. What are you talking about? I was going to say I was going to fire him. What are you talking about? That kind of thing. One of the things he apparently said at some point was, yeah, this guy Powell, he's insane. I don't know how he got nominated. And Trump was the one who nominated him in his first term, right? So he wasn't the one who first nominated Powell to be on the board of governors, but it was Trump when Janet Yellen was nearing the end of her term as Fed chair. Trump was in power at that point, and then he nominated Powell. And on paper, Powell, you would think, would be one of Trump's buddies, right? Because Powell, Bernanke and Yellen, PhD economists coming from academia. Bernanke had been at Princeton, and Yellen, I forget where she was from. I think she might have been from Berkeley or something. I had college professor academics, and that whereas Powell was, a lawyer, got a JD, and then he was in investment banking for decades. He was like undersecretary of Treasury or something for the H.W. Bush administration. Okay, so he's from Wall Street. He's not, some college professor egghead. So you'd think he'd be one of Trump's buddies, and that ostensibly is what he was in the beginning. He was, Michigan also was more of a right-leaning economist, and so, Trump was appointing him to fill that role to replace Yellen. And then, Powell kept tightening, and then in 2019, asset prices start dipping, and Trump's really mad. And then, like I said, one of the things is, he kept floating the idea, I wish I shouldn't have appointed him. That was one of the worst mistakes I made, and blah, blah, blah. So, the thing with Lisa Cook is, so she was originally appointed in 2023, and so that 14-year term, so she's just gotten on the job, so she could have been around for a while. It's kind of like a Supreme Court thing, except that's for life. That if you get somebody young on the Supreme Court, that's like a big deal. So here, having somebody that was put in that's dovish, especially too, like if you go and look at her research stuff, I mean, it's typically progressive. She's a black woman in a lot of her economic research. She's a PhD economist. On areas that we would think. So she's dovish and progressive, and so Trump's trying to get rid of her. So a lot of people think that, this isn't just that Trump can't sleep at night knowing somebody falsified something on a mortgage application. It's that he's trying to, it's sort of like, packing the Supreme Court. That's kind of like what this is. That's what the allegation is. So I'm just kind of explaining on the surface, this is what's happening, and this is why people are upset about that. I believe, I haven't found anyone disputing this, but the critics are saying this is unprecedented, where a president has tried to remove someone from the board of governors in a fashion like this. So both sides stipulate, the Federal Reserve Act says that it's not an at-will appointment. The president can't just fire you from this kind of a position. There has to be cause. And so that's what they're arguing over, that it's one of Trump's buddies in the government just saying, hey, she falsified her application. She hasn't been convicted or anything of that. And so this kind of opens up a can of worms that down the road with this precedent, the president could just ask somebody in his administration, hey, tell me something publicly that this person did. I'll get rid of them. And then by the time the dust settles, we'll get, the interest rate cut that we want. Like, that's not an implausible scenario given how things are going.
Yeah, as the left, calls him authoritarian for really, really dumb reasons. He starts doing all these authoritarian things. Mm-hmm. I will say, though, I think it's unprecedented what Trump's doing, but it's not unprecedented for people to get caught just with the look of impropriety on that position, Board of Governors of the Fed, and then just step down. That's happened 3 times in the last 4 or 5 years if my grok is telling me the truth. Just, suspicious stock trades. Mostly it looks like this is. And when that rears its ugly head, these people just resign because it's bad to have somebody who looks like a crook.
Okay. So let me just make sure the audience is getting the subtlety of it. So you're saying, yes, it might be true, as the critics are alleging, no president in history has fired or tried to fire somebody for impropriety. But you're saying because the other people had the good sense just to resign when they got caught with their hand in the cookie jar. Whereas Lisa Cook, what are you talking about? I'm not stepping down, you fascist.
I'm not being so bold as to use the word because, but it does look like that there is a norm there. Mm-hmm. As you were talking about all the scientifically discovered rules, obviously, there's 7 members of this board and they got 14-year things appointed by this and all these rules. It's so scientific, it almost makes me forget that what we're talking about is a Soviet-style central planning commissar for what interest rates are supposed to be, as well as, the regulation of all the banks and all this other stuff. And that just makes me laugh. And the other thing is, how do people with a straight face say that the Fed is independent from the government or the executive branch or anything?
Right.
I mean, I don't think that's ever been true. I think you were saying on the Reason podcast that it is understood that prior to an election, the Fed is going to loosen money to try and make the economy, give the economy a little stimulus according to their framework, and everybody just kind of knows that.
Yeah. So that specifically what I was talking about there is it's called, I've heard it referred to as like the political business cycle, or maybe the electoral business cycle, something like that. So, and I went one time and tried to dig up like the econometrics assessments, and it wasn't as smoking gun as I thought it was going to be. But yeah, the conventional wisdom used to be that certainly in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the idea was that people thought going into an election, if there was an incumbent running for re-election, that the Fed tended to be looser than, other things equal. Right. And the idea was just that the executive would, lean on them to say, hey, we want to goose things because people, if the economy's bad, you're not going to get reelected. And whereas vice versa. Yeah, if the economy's okay, you're probably going to get reelected. That's just, rule of thumb. So there's that element. Also, too, you're exactly right, Adam, that for one thing, I used to do in some of my undergrad classes, I would show a chart of the Fed's balance sheet, historically. And I would say, hey, if you're ever taking a history test or something and you forget when all the wars were, just look at the Fed's balance sheet and you can tell.
That's right.
And so if you think about it, well, no, what if it just happened to be, no, during a war when prices are rising and things are tight, that's exactly when you wouldn't need loose monetary policy in terms of if all that the central bank cared about was the purchasing power of the dollar or even the balance between inflation and unemployment. That's all fine if there's a wartime boom happening. And yet that's exactly when the Fed runs the printing presses like crazy, sopping up government debt, because that's what that's why governments create central banks, is to be the government's banker to inflate and buy government debt when the private markets would not, absorb those bonds with as much enthusiasm as the government would like. So that's why governments create central banks.
I think I'm convinced, Bob, this Federal Reserve thing, the central bank's a pretty bad deal. But where you won't find a bad deal?
I would hope it would be some sort of tight-knit family-run business.
That's exactly what you want, very wholesome. Maybe somebody who has a business where they can help you get your brand out and fundraise and create merch and swag, especially for special events. Maybe somebody called the Swan Brothers, our sponsor for these crossover shows, Bob. I wanted to say during our little ad read that a lot of people think, or maybe they're getting the impression that this is just your standard garden variety merch store. You get T-shirts and mugs, maybe some hats, but that is just not the case. It's all of those things done really, really well, but also companies use them for really, really high-end things. Like if you're having a summit or a board meeting or big trade shows, even if you just want to get your product name and brand on high-end stuff to really cement deals or reward members of your organization or to court people. A couple examples are they sell North Face performance jackets, really premium stuff embroidered with your name on it, your brand, and also things like really high end swag, like these custom crystal decanters with your name laser engraved and your logo. Custom poker sets. I'm really interested in that. Might be getting a Heyman Nature poker set. Crystal decanters, just all this really hefty stuff. It's not, if you're thinking like merch and swag, is this plastic crap that you'll pick up at a, I don't know, Freedom Fest or something. It's not that. It's everything. They do high end stuff too, and it's really, really good quality.
Yes, so folks, go to theswanbrothers.com/cross to give them your details, and someone will contact you and work with you to brainstorm about your event.
Absolutely. theswanbrothers.com/cross. So the last crazy...
Well, hang on. Let me just speak a bit more on that. So the other thing, too, that occurred to me as you and I are going, and I'm sitting here talking about, there's a 14-year term. And so you can see, folks, that it's kind of like analogous to the Senate or something, where they had, what is it, the 6-year terms, and they're not, and they stagger them. The same thing with the what they did with the Board of Governors is that the 14-year, they're staggered, right? So it's not that everybody comes up for renewal at the same time. So it's supposed to like lock in. So there's this, like, it moves like a glacier. But on the other hand, it's not, there's a culture at the very, I need to do more research to see like exactly how this works. But in other words, what I'm getting at is, it's not like if somebody's mad at the U.S. Senate, they just blame the one guy. You know what I mean? Like, you could just be mad at the senators per se, and there is like the House leadership or the controlling leadership and whatnot. But I'm saying here, like, why is everyone just so mad at the Fed chair all the time? And it's because people know that the Fed chair kind of runs the show. And like under Greenspan, for example, my understanding is like he didn't even brook dissent. It was like privately people could voice stuff, but publicly it was like no, we're unified. Whereas like Bernanke more welcome to have discussion, and it was okay if somebody disagrees with me publicly. You know what I'm saying? So I'm my point is just, even on its own terms, this is all kind of a farce. And then also, we had a really independent monetary policy back on the gold standard,
right? And
nobody wants that. You really you want to take politics out of it? Okay, well then have a fixed peg to gold. That's pretty apolitical. Well, no, Bob. What if there were a war? We have to be able to print. Wait a minute. I thought we weren't doing based on, doesn't Congress declare wars? What does monetary policy have to do with a war?
Right.
You telling me they would monetize deficits? I thought you weren't supposed to do that.
Yeah, it's so gross. You're literally talking about this crony public-private cartel. But we want that independent from politics, and it's so scientific. Also, you cracked me up when you talked about Greenspan, that spindly old man being such a tough mob boss. I'm picturing him in a darkened room. All the governors are around the table. He's walking around with a baseball bat, trying to ferret out the person who's going against him. Shall we move on to tariffs, legal or illegal?
Sure thing.
So you might have wondered when Trump just popped off and said, hey, I've discovered this delightful word, tariff. It just rolls off the tongue. I'm going to use it on everybody for everything. And you might have wondered where he got the authority to do that. I just kind of thought he did, because the executive has swallowed up so much power that you'd think would rest in Congress or some other place. But it turns out he was reading into this weird emergency provision in something called the IEEPA. You're familiar with it, right, Bob? The International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. Which, oddly enough, does not explicitly authorize tariffs or taxes, which is why this group of blue states and small businesses formed a coalition to sue, and they appear to be winning. They won in the lower court, got kicked up to an appellate court, said, yep, you're right, Trump can't do this. It's not every tariff. It's specifically the 10% universal tariff for all countries, and then this other arbitrary one that goes up to 50% depending on whether the country is adequately stopping the importation of fentanyl into our country, which is a little weird. But along those two metrics, the appellate court says, yeah, Trump can't do that, but they're staying the enforcement until October something or other, because obviously the Supreme Court is going to have to weigh in on this. And I thought that was all fascinating. I thought I was watching Trump's coronation. So, yeah, he can just do stuff. It didn't even occur to me that maybe this is in some way illegal.
Yeah, I mean, if he's going to go start wars, how's he going to pay for them?
Right? Come on.
You gotta. It seems like the Constitution's kind of inconsistent if it lets him just declare war unilaterally and then not come up with a means to pay for it. So
in tatters, they say.
Right. I mean, in fairness to him, that's why he's saying, well, that's why I got to take the Fed over, because they're not letting me tax, so I got to print the money to go, let Israel fight these wars for us, right? I said it. Ooh,
oh, dear God.
I was naughty. So, yeah, what's on that point, I brought this up. I did an analysis over at the Infinio podcast, Infi, that I do, when Trump first rolled out. You remember just how ridiculous that was when he had the big, the tables showing the reciprocal tariffs that were just completely made up.
Yeah.
They were saying, oh, yeah, we're taking what they do and we're cutting it in half. And they're just making those numbers up. It was based on like what our trade deficit was with the country.
They were made up, Bob, but they were made up to 2 decimal places.
Yeah.
So
anyway, well, you're right. The justification they give, and again, they had to do this because they know we can't just say the president's going to start imposing taxes. You're not allowed to do that, in case people are missing the banter here, that the Constitution clearly says the tax bill, I think they originate in the House, right? But certainly it's Congress controls the purse strings. Congress has the power to tax. The executive branch can't just impose taxes unilaterally, right? So that's why they had to frame it as, it's this emergency thing. And if you go and read that actual, what is it, 77? Is that what you said? Legislation.
Yeah, the phrase is he's granted some emergency powers. I didn't even look to see what they were, but it's not tariffs and taxes. And it's in response to, quote, unusual and extraordinary threats.
Well, yeah, so if you go and read the thing and you can understand the context, it's stuff like if some country sneak attacks us,
right,
and then they have sleeper cells in our country and they start setting off bombs and they're drawing down on their U.S. checking accounts to pay to go kill cops, the president is allowed to freeze their assets. Right. That's the kind of thing this is talking about, and he doesn't have to first go get congressional approval, right? And that's the thing. So it's got to be an emergency, and I think there's even limited duration too. Like he can't just do it forever. It's just got to be like, so that's the type of, whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing to give the president that kind of power, that's clearly, if you go read this act, that's the kind of thing they have in mind. Not.
So you're saying the Congress will make a law that's really narrow in scope, but then the executive branch will go ahead and overblow their authority? Or what?
I'm glad you were sitting down, but yes, it does appear to be. It does appear that the executive has oversight of his authority in this situation, but we're still looking into it.
Let's go look at that Commerce Clause. I'm starting to think there's something up with that one, too.
So, and that's also
he literally said, when he's citing trade deficits and fentanyl trafficking, that's what he said was the national emergency. And then Trump being Trump, he says, quote, this decision by this appellate court could literally destroy the United States. So it's been nice knowing you, Bob.
Yeah. And my response to that, folks, I retweeted and I said, geez, you would think the GOP-controlled House and Senate would go ahead and enact tariffs to prevent the destruction of the United States.
That's right.
Right. And then I had people, answering matter of fact, well, you see, it's not in their interest to do so, blah, 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 explaining. But my point, of course, folks, is it's just mind-boggling to me that Trump is sitting there lamenting, oh, yeah, these lily-livered justices, that, some of them, God bless them, some of them were even Obama appointees that are doing the right thing for this country. But when the court is not saying you can't have tariffs, they're saying the executive can't unilaterally impose them. The Constitution says if there should be tariffs, go to Congress. And right now, the Republicans control everything. And so it's insane. If it's such a good move, then why doesn't Trump say to Congress, hey, my fellow GOPers, let's impose this great thing that apparently is going to save the country. And yet he can't do that. Instead, he's got to whine about, these judges just want to kill the country. I mean, it's just shocking.
I mean,
and it ties into the whole strongman thing. Are we going to end up having to say Rachel Maddow was right? Because I really don't want to have to say that. But this kind of stuff, it is just example after example where he is just going out of his way to say, no, the president should be able to do whatever the heck I want, and there's no checks on me whatsoever.
Bob, I am going to change my name, cancel my telephone number, and move into the woods before I ever say that Rachel Maddow was right. We're
Just
talking
don't start
about...
mailing letters to people if you do that.
No, I don't even have a hoodie and sunglasses. We're talking all about the structure of the Constitution and who has what powers. But people who support everything Trump's been doing, you know, walking into these tough guy negotiations, wielding his club of tariffs, and he's accomplishing all these things. He's gotten so many deals, and it's super important. So to heck with your telling me about the structure of, you know, how powers are supposed to be delegated. Maybe the president should just be able to do that because it's good. Can't you see it's good? I mean, what would you say to all the people on Twitter who are probably saying something like that? If it's illegal, you should make it legal for the president to do this because, hey, you got to get stuff done.
I would be sympathetic to that if the things he were doing I independently endorsed.
Sure.
But since with most of this stuff, I don't, because even on the tariffs, you know, I have said, I'm not just a knee jerk like, oh, I don't like taxes. Taxes are theft. Like, that's not what I'm doing. For people who have followed my stuff on this, I've actually gotten a lot of pushback from more left-leaning libertarian types who think I'm just kissing Trump's butt or I'm trying to cozy up to the MAGA people or whatever, and I'm pulling my punches or whatever, and I'm being too soft on tariff. So, no, I have made qualified defenses saying, yeah, if you drastically cut income tax rates, if you cut spending, and then you use tariffs to try to cushion the blow, that conceivably could make sense, blah, blah. You know, I've said stuff like that. But other than that, everything else we've been talking about, but even on its own terms of the tariff stuff, the way they've done it, he didn't just say, you know, on February 1st, okay, here's my comprehensive plan. I've had Stephen Moran write up the explanation for it in terms of the theory, and we're going to implement it this way, and everybody can plan it in 6 months. This is going to happen, and you can bank on it. No, it's been, oh, I got tariffs. Oh, wait, no, I got a phone call off for 3 months. Oh, wait, you mean no one can do anything. How could you possibly do international supply chains with this guy sitting in the White House, armed with his keyboard and Wi-Fi connection? I mean, so that's kind of what my point is. I think I'm less alarmed about this stuff because I don't think that the U.S. is the one place on planet Earth where anything good ever happens. You know what I mean? Like, I'm more of a, yeah, this country's, you know, irretrievable at this point. That's why I'm for Texas secession and so forth and whatever. And I'm looking at sprouts of liberty elsewhere too, hoping those things can work. Whereas if you really thought, no, we're making our last stand for freedom here in the continental United States, you should be more alarmed by what Trump's doing than I am.
Yeah. There's an immense value to have consistency in your government. It's what causes people to not have regime uncertainty and want to invest here and, you know, not be risk averse. And if you've just got some lunatic in the White House doing whatever that he, or even if he's not a lunatic, if you just have that much centralized power, it makes the environment extraordinarily risky. What if Kamala Harris wins next time, and now she has access to all these things, and she decides to go crazy? I opened up this crossover this week, Bob, by talking about it's only been 7.5 months since he got sworn in. The great orange, what do we call him now? Hero? Fascist?
I thought you were going to say tsunami.
He's a whirlwind, that's for sure. The Mar-a-Lago tornado. So, I mean, I'm sure you think less of him after this 7.5 months than you did on his signing in. Are there any good things that you can point to that you're still? I mean, I assume you're still happy that it wasn't Kamala Harris, because I sure am.
Yeah, I
even
mean,
as bad as he's turned out.
Right. So I said that in the reason thing, and partly I did that is because I'm making assumptions, but I was concerned that like a lot of their listenership or viewership, I guess that's where I was going to say watchership, and that doesn't seem like a word.
Experiencership.
Yeah. It is like more libertarian types or whatever, left libertarians, I guess is the term.
Probably, yeah.
And so I didn't want to just be like, yeah, high five, Trump's a fascist, am I right? Like I didn't want to be doing that. Partly because I would have felt dirty that, well, no, geez, if I'm cozying up to the MAGA people over here, right? So so I went out of my way to say, look, on the tariff stuff, you know, I have given a qualified defense of it, saying in principle you could blah blah blah, and yes, I said I'm glad that he beat Kamala Harris and everything. I was very relieved when he won. So that is, I still believe that. And even as much as I can't stand, what Lutnick and those guys are doing right now, other things equal, I would rather a bunch of successful business people be in the orbit of the president and having him do, quote, pro-business things than a bunch of semi-Marxists who hate capitalism and rich people and they're the ones guiding economic policy. So that's all true. However, there also is something to be said that at some point, if you're going to have somebody doing awful policies, it would be better to have the person who's loudly saying, I hate capitalism, that's why I'm doing these policies, as opposed to, the other guy. So it's at some point, even if, yes, objectively, Trump's policies, I think, are better than what Kamala Harris's would have been now, if this ends up leading to a disaster, it's going to be hard to say, oh, yeah, but capitalism is still awesome. That's just because Trump didn't do it right. And people go, oh, okay, yeah. And say, oh, Doge didn't really cut very much when you look at it in the grand scheme. Like, oh, okay, yeah, no, it was pretty radical. Like, they were saying some crazy stuff. And you know what I'm saying? So if they're going to come in and overturn the tables and do all this stuff and say, hey, we're going to get rid of the Department of Education, and then they end up massively increasing spending when all is said and done, then that's kind of goofy.
Yeah, that's a good point. He's muddying the rhetorical waters for us, anyway.
Yeah. We got to mention. I mean, your background is different from before he was inaugurated.
Oh, that's right. I mean, yeah, a man who got a very unjust prison sentence, Ross Ulbricht, did get freed, so he gave us that. But also, I mean, I do think, I haven't looked into the details, but I think the regulatory burden is lesser than it would have been, obviously, under Harris. I think he's actually removed some stuff. I think his energy policy is way better.
Unleashing
energy, fossil fuels, and I think he's opening up the world for nuclear, as we talked about a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
He immediately got rid of these transgender lunatics, these men and women in sports. He got rid of that immediately. He's making noises about, ending the Department of Education.
Yeah, and the Genius Act, so Infinio, I'd been doing a ton on this stuff.
Crypto stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so we can quibble about the particular pieces of the legislation, but I mean, in the grand scheme, that is such night and day different from what Kamala Harris, from what the Biden administration was doing, and then, I didn't say what Joe Biden was doing. Biden administration was doing.
You mean AutoPen?
Yeah, and then what would have happened under Kamala Harris. So, yes, a lot of that stuff, it's, again, my point is, still, on paper, I'm glad he got in terms of the beneficial results, because I think, if nothing else, it bought 4 more years for people to figure out what the heck are we going to do. Right. Whereas, there really would have been the walls closing in, whereas now the walls are kind of oscillating. You don't even know what the heck the walls are doing. So it's almost better to have unpredictable walls than know that, the walls are going to keep closing in. So there's that element.
Yep, I tend to agree with that. Well, those are the 3 things we were going to focus in on. Do you have any more pearls of wisdom you want to share?
I suppose, too, in terms of foreign policy, as bad as some of the things are, I still, and you can call me naive or whatever, call me irresponsible, but I really do, just the way his body language, I really think Trump wants there to be peace, and just on certain things just reads the room and just says, I don't have the cards, I can't do it, and then he's got to go with it because he's got such an ego and everything. He's got to pretend like, oh yeah, this was my plan all along, when he's just realizing, no, he can't do it on that thing. So I think even on that, even though I know a lot of people would say, what, are you kidding me? He's been awful on, and yes, but compared to the counterfactual, I don't think so. Like, at the very least, Trump and his buddies are not part of, like, the new world order and
right.
The globalists,
whatever that is,
who have been, like, working whatever the Bilderberger, like, I'm not saying they're all like guys sitting around reading Murray Rothbard since they were in high school and they can't wait to just unleash laissez-faire. That's not what I'm saying, but it's a different group of people. And so in terms of what people were worried would have happened to the prospects for global freedom if Hillary Clinton had won back the first time around, or then Kamala Harris this time, I do think at the very least there's a reason all the establishment voices came out
For sure.
denouncing him, and they wanted to get rid of him so badly, was because they knew we can't play ball with this guy. He's just too crazy.
Or at least he's going to be graveling the gears.
Right. Again, not that he's a force for light and truth, but that
Right.
they just can't control him the way, oh, yeah, George W. Bush, totally get, Joe Biden, we know how to deal with this guy.
Well, if you're a sucker for Trump's body language, I'm right there next to you because I read it the exact same way. I think if Kamala Harris had won, we would be in the exact same problem with Ukraine and Russia, except we would have probably continued to just shovel over more money, more and more and more. And I mean, I don't know what would have happened in the Middle East, but it would have been at least as bad. And maybe we would have gotten pushed into actual shooting, boots on the ground war with Iran, more than just dropping a few bunker busters or whatever. I mean, that could have easily happened.
It could have, and also possibly because, especially if it had been her, because she would have had to prove to everyone that she was tough.
Yep.
Whereas Trump, say what you will about him, he doesn't need to convince people that he's crazy and he could nuke people. They're like, yeah, we know. Calm down.
I'm leaving myself open for the charge of misogyny here, but I think female leaders and weak male leaders are going to be the first ones to get browbeaten by warhawks into being military, bellicose, because they don't have the strength to just say no. Anybody who calls them a wimp is they're just gonna roll right over. A generalization, a tendency, not every individual person, obviously.
Yeah, like a good example of that in action that demonstrates it really isn't purely about your XY chromosomes is Margaret Thatcher, calling George H.W. Bush a wimp, right? Do I have the anecdote right?
Don't get all wobbly on me, George.
And so, that's a good example where, that some people think that, that could be partly why, that affected the U.S. foreign policy is he had to show that he wasn't.
Yep, there's definitely something to that. All right, so you love Trump and you never did anything wrong. I think we got your point there, Bob.
Yeah, well, I just want to be consistent. If you're going to be able to start wars, you've got to be able to fund them with taxation or the printing press.
Dude, 7.5 months it's been. We have over 3 more years of this tornado, this orange, dusty tornado.
It's like one of those doctors, what is it, Thing 1 and Thing 2, when they come out and they're just the house
exactly.
and you're just, well, maybe at the end they'll magically clean everything up.
Hoo-wee. Take deep breaths and strap your seatbelts on. All right, Bob, well, this was great. Thank you for your edification. Remember, folks, if you need things to sell stuff and promote brands, that is a skull. And please go to theswanbrothers.com/cross and get all of those things. And we'll catch you next time on one of these crossovers.
Take care, folks.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.